Hello viewing millions, welcome back. I'm really happy today because I got a really exciting parcel yesterday evening. When I got home I found, well, it was sent to work actually, and I opened it yesterday evening, and it was from Jackson's, the wonderful art shop in London that always seem to have fantastic deals. And if you're not familiar with them, go over to their website. I think it's jacksonsart.com, something like that. I'll put it in the video description. And they always have very good deals. They often have international shipping. This is not a sponsored video. They're not paying me to say this. They've sent me these products to review. Honestly and openly, it's not in any way like sponsored. I'm not being told I have to be nice. I can say what the hell I like, and I will. If I don't like something, believe me, I will always say it. I'm not one to fawn to companies that send me stuff. So that's how things are, and I'm going to show you what they sent me. First of all, I emailed them and I said, look, you may know of me, and they said, oh yeah, we really like your videos. And I said, look, I want to review your own brand watercolors because they interest me. They seem very high quality for an own brand, and you're selling them at a really good price point. And it took a little while to get a response because they're very busy because it's the run up to Christmas. And they came back to me and they said, look, what we're going to send you is 12 full pans of our own brand watercolour, which come in these cute little bags, so you can see them. They're extruded paint, not poured, so you get quite a lot of pigment in there. And 12 of those, and I'd already said to them that what I like to review, okay, is a warm and cool, red, yellow, blue, and a yellow ochre and a burnt sienna, because I think that's what a beginner needs. And I'm looking at good quality paints, not student quality paints, good quality paints I can recommend to beginners who are trying to make that step up, who want to try, better, but still economical because they're beginning and they're going to use a lot of paint because they're practicing. And so I already said this to them. They said, we know you want burnt sienna, but what we're going to send you is the 12 colours we sell as a set of 12 that we recommend, for beginners. But as you want a burnt sienna, we'll send you a tube of our burnt sienna. That way you can try out our tube paint and our pans and see what the difference is. So yesterday I poured a half pan of burnt sienna. It's not dry at all, it's just starting to dry, just so that I had it ready, because if I'm testing things out, I like to work from pans. They also sent me some brushes, which I'm not going to cover in this video, and they sent me the palette to go with the paints, which was really nice of them. So what they sent me was an Accoya synthetic, which is kind of an alternative to Hog, or very stiff synthetic, for a heavy body acrylic or oil, and I'm going to review that in a later video, along with these brushes, which will also get reviewed in a later video. Firstly, they're Studio synthetic brushes, which are probably fairly, I'm guessing, fairly standard sort of synthetic Taclon-y kind of fibre, and I'll review those later. And then the Icon, which were their sort of higher quality ones, which I've heard are similar to Proline by ProArt. And as you know, if you watch my channel, Proline Plus, which is a slightly different fibre by ProArt, is my go-to. I really love that as a fibre. So they're going to appear in later videos, but I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that I'd had those and that those are coming. So there we are. Now I've written out my swatch cards, looked at the pigments, done all of that. Everything is ready, and I'm going to lay out my palette now. And I'm really particular about how I lay out a palette, so I thought I'd keep this in the video because it may be of use to you if you're laying out a palette, to see how I choose to organise my paints, because I don't do what manufacturers tell me. I don't do them in that order. I do them in my order. My order is better, trust me. So I'm going to arrange this, so I always have yellow, red, blue, and I always work cool to warm within them. So I'm going to do it, and I'll talk about the paints as I put them in, so that you know what we've got. And some of these are really obvious things that I would think are really good to have in this kind of set. Some of the colours I'm a little bit, oh okay, why did they choose that? But we'll see. And we'll see how it goes. So French Ultramarine is the warm blue that they've provided me with, which is what I would want. It's French Ultramarine is my favourite ultramarine. You'll see they are extruded. They are extruded paint, as you can see. They look very similar to Winsor & Newton. They're very hard. They have got honey and what is often called Kordofan gum arabic, which is correctly gum Senegal. It's actually from a different tree. Absolutely what I would expect. Now they are loose, they're not fixed into the pans, so I'm going to have to put some gum arabic underneath them to hold them down. I've got a quick tip video on how to do that, and I'll link it up there in the iCards so that if you have that issue you can resolve it. Now the cool blue, what you would usually get from most manufacturers as one's cool blue would be phthalo blue, and in this set I actually got nearer a mid-tone blue, cobalt blue, which I'm a little bit confused / uneasy about, because most cobalt blues, I'm not saying this is one of them, and actually that is better, that is fixed in. Most cobalt blues are quite neutral in tone. They are not cool, they are not warm, they're somewhere in the middle. And I'm a little bit concerned that not having a true cool blue is perhaps going to be limiting, so we're going to have to see how that goes. The warm red is a cadmium red light, which is again exactly what I'd want, and a really nice paint to have because it's got the opacity that you don't get with the synthetics, the pyrols and so on. And it's made with a single pigment cadmium red genuine, so it's not a cheap alternative, it's not a hue, it's the real thing. The cool red they call carmine, which is a PV19 quinacridone violet, exactly the kind of cool red you would normally expect. Looking at the half pan, it doesn't look terribly cool, but they're very deceptive. When you actually paint them out, often things look very different, so we'll see how that goes. So far so good. Okay, we've got a slightly weird cool blue, but we're going to see how things go. Cadmium red light is the warm yellow, and that's good because we've got a cad red and a cad yellow, and the combination of the two gives oranges you can't really mix with any other colours. I love that combination orange that you can get, and it's a lovely bright one. Even though it's the light cadmium red, it's a lovely vivid colour, and I really like that. And again, genuine and no declared padding out. They haven't added lithopone or anything, or at least they haven't declared it. Lemon yellow is the cool yellow, and it's Hansa Yellow 10G PY3, the standard kind of lemon yellow you get in virtually every set these days. So we'll put that in. I'm going to slide these to the left because the nice thing with these larger palettes is you can actually always squeeze a few more pans into them. Might be able to get a whole extra pan on that row. So that's the top row, that's what we've got there. And the bottom row is our sort of earths and greens and so on, and the first one I'm going to put in is the colour I really don't like being in sets because a lot of people don't need it, don't use it. It's a black. Chromatic neutrals are the way to go with watercolour. There's not really a need for a black, especially in a field set or a beginner's set, so I find that a little odd. That's ivory black, which is PK9 bone black, which is made from abattoir waste. So that is not going to be a vegan-friendly paint because the pigment is derived from animal bone. So keep that in mind if that's something that bothers you. The next brown is burnt umber, which in this case is PBR7, brown iron oxide, which is what I expect a burnt umber to be. And it looks the right sort of dark, sort of cool brown that you'd expect a burnt umber to be. Yellowish undertone to it. We now have a very much warmer colour, which is Venetian red, and this is one of the only, there's a very few of these that are not single pigment, and this is one of them. This Venetian red is PR101 red iron oxide, the synthetic version, which is what most Venetian reds are. But this one's also got yellow iron oxide, the natural version, PY43, mixed into it, which obviously makes it more orange, more warm. So I think that's been added to shift it over so that it's a bit less intensely red. We'll see how that goes. Again, to me, Venetian red is a certain intensity, and that's a little softer, but we're going to see. Yellow ochre is the next colour, which is, you know, the standard. You must have a yellow ochre. And this is natural yellow iron oxide, which is PY43. PY42, of course, is the synthetic. There's very little difference between them in practice. Really, there is very little difference. So we'll see how that goes. And now we get into the greens, and the kind of warmer green is permanent sap green, which in this case is an interesting sap green. It's PB29 ultramarine blue mixed with PY154, which is benzimidazolone yellow 154. So this is a convenience mix, probably similar to something I could get by mixing the warm yellow with the warm blue. It's sort of slightly muddy green, but we'll see how that goes. I've never had a sap green that's got that particular combination before. And finally, another mixed one. So what I like is that the absolute primaries are all single pigment and some of the earths are not, and that's actually good because I like my colour primaries to be single pigment. The last colour is a phthalo green deep, which is a combination of PG7 phthalocyanine green blue shade with a little bit, I guess, of PB15 phthalocyanine blue green shade. So it's a phthalo green that they've added blue to darken it. It looks very dark on the swatch, so we'll see how that looks when we actually use it. And what I mean by that is that all the paints have got these lovely labels, and I don't know what I'm going to do with them, that have got an opacity swatch of the actual paint, which I think is lovely. It's a really nice touch. I like the Jackson's packaging. A lot of people think that sort of thing doesn't matter, but you know, I really like nice packaging on products. I like the things I work with to look pretty. Can't help that. That's how I am. I like things to look nice. They've got a really nice aesthetic at the moment at Jackson's. I think their website's gorgeous. And if you get hold of their, what do they call it? Their Watercolour 2018 catalogue and their Materials catalogue 2016-17, they sent them to me with these. I already had 2 copies of the Watercolour catalogue, so I really liked having another one because I want to cut it up and use it in art journaling because it's so gorgeous. Honestly, the Watercolour catalogue is a thing of absolute beauty. So if you get a chance to look at that, do. It's a really nice catalogue, and it's a really good example of how a catalogue can go beyond a catalogue, because not only has it got lots of information about using products in there, which you don't normally find in a catalogue, it has also got gorgeous pictures of the products, and I would really, really love to spend a day with their stylist when they're taking the photos of their products, because it looks like they have the sort of aesthetic they achieve really kind of goes with what I like a lot, so I find it very attractive. Okay, let's swatch these out. So I've got here, these are my swatch cards that I use for everything. These are Aquafine by Daler and Rowney hot press student grade watercolour paper. Why do I use that for swatching? Because it is rubbish. It is one of the worst papers on the market. I hate it. My feeling is that if a paint looks good on this is seeing it at its worst. So when I use it, it will always look better. So I like to see things on a flat off-white surface. And it's a funny paper. It's often almost slightly greasy and the paint doesn't move properly. But that's what I use. The reasons I use it are it's really cheap, and it comes in packs of 50 sheets. Pads of 50 sheets. So what I can do is take it to the nice chap at the printing shop nearby, and he will cut it for me and make me these little cards that I file away. So I have all of these for all the paints I work with. Okay, let's zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to swatch, I'll put them on here and paint on them. I think that will work. And I'm going to use let's use a Proline brush, because I feel like using one. So this is a Pro Art size 12 Proline round by Pro Art. You can get them from Jackson's, and what I'll do is I'll put a link down there to my website, and that link will take you to a list of all the colours, everything we've used here, and you can buy them from Jackson's, including the brushes, everything. So let's do lemon yellow first, and what I do when I swatch is I wet the paper first, because I like to look at flow when I do this. And they lift really well. They lift up really very easily, which is nice. So if I put that on, We'll see there's a little photo. It looks a little dull, and there's a reason for that I'll sort of confess in a second. I paint with dirty water when I'm filming because it shows up. You can see where the water is, and the only time it's ever a problem is with lemon yellow, because it makes the edges look a little bit brown, a bit dull, and that's not real. That's just because I'm using shitty water. So keep that in mind. So that's the Hansa Yellow 10G lemon yellow. That's a really nice colour. It's got vividness to it. It's got a lot of pigmentation. It lifts really easily from the pan, and I really like. That's a good start. Let's put it like that. So next up is the cadmium yellow light. So you can see slightly dirty water, just so you can see it. Again, lifting really well. Now this is a much denser pigment. It doesn't move quite so freely, but I'm sure if I gave it a chance it would. It's a lovely sunshine warm yellow. Exactly what you'd expect, and it goes a long way. So yeah, another nice one. Liking this already. There's definitely a difference between the two. I've got them next to each other now, off camera, and yes, one has got a green undertone and one has definitely got a red undertone. So they're not too similar, they're not too close. Carmine next, which is Quin Violet. Now that's spreading easily because it's a lighter pigment. It's smaller grind. Cadmium's usually very dense. This is a cool red, not too vivid. It is a carmine. It's not a sort of a Quin Rose or anything like that. Most definitely a carmine type colour. Put some deeper pigment in there, and I like to just let these float and let the pigment move around, see how they look when they dry. So that was, most definitely the right kind of shade. The pigment load on these is really good. I'm impressed, and these are very economical. I'll talk about pricing later, but they're very economical. Oops. That one had a lot of red still in it. Let's block that off. Sorry, sometimes if I don't clean the brush properly, I end up with a lot of the last paint still on the Cad Red light here. So again, you can see it's floating nicely. It's not whooshing like the core paints do. This reminds me a lot of Schminker in terms of how these cadmiums look, like the softness of the granulation, which is there. It's very beautiful, very soft granulation in the middle there. The intensity of the colour, the amount of pigment, very Schminker-like, very, very Schminker-like. I would say the feel of the pans is very Winsor & Newton-like. They're hard, but they lift like Wallace Seymour or Schminker or White Knights. They've got that really lovely, easy lift to them. So let's try the controversial cobalt blue. Controversial probably only to me. Okay, that's a cool cobalt blue. That's not too neutral. I was worried it wasn't going to be cool enough. Now, in a way it isn't, but we'll see. I have got another objection to cobalt blue, which I'll explain. If you look at the pigments that they've used, you've got a inorganic dense, inorganic dense, inorganic dense, inorganic dense. So in all of the other of the primaries, you've got one light non-granulating, whereas with the blues, they're both dense, they both granulate. That's kind of limiting. I mean, okay, you get a bit of granulation with a quinacridone violet, it's true, but it's not anywhere near the same. So you've got a bit of limitation there, that you can't make a non-granulating mix with these blues because both of them granulate. So that's something you have to kind of live with. I would probably just buy a phthalo blue as an addition. If I was buying this as a set, I'd buy a phthalo blue and put it in there. Keep the cobalt blue and have it as the middle blue rather than the cool blue. So let's try out this ultramarine. Well, that's a nice colour. Good granulation. Really very nice granulation, actually. And it's quite an immediate granulation. You don't have to wait an age for that. And this, I've done a video about the different types of granulation. There's a flocculation versus a sedimentation, which a lot of people don't realise. I'll link that in the iCard. You can watch that if you want to understand the difference. That's another reason I swatch on cold press, on hot press paper, because if you see granulation on this, it's a property of the paint rather than a property of density. So if I put something like chromic oxide green onto a hot press paper, it would just sit flat and ugly. Put it onto a rough paper, it sinks down into the crevices and it looks like it's granulated through sedimentation, but the pigment itself hasn't, whereas something like the ultramarines will. So bottom row now, this is the phthalo green deep, and I'm going to put a very small amount on. Okay, so that still looks like a phthalo green. It's not as deep as I was I was a bit worried it was going to be really dark, because that's what the swatch kind of implied. That's a fairly normal phthalo green, a blue shade. So I'm not too worried about that. The fact that it's mixed might mean that if I mix with that, I don't get a perfect result, but we'll see. And often when you mix with a phthalo green, all you're doing is adding yellow ochre to make it look more real. Next up is the permanent sap green, and I mentioned previously that this was not one that I'd used before. I'd never had a permanent sap green that was an ultramarine that had been sorry, I had an unclean brush again there. Sorry, my back is, many of you know already, I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means my joints spontaneously dislocate, and the bottom of my spine is trying to dislocate at the moment. But I'm going to persevere because I want to finish these and then stop shooting. So let's see this. I'm expecting a soft but quite vivid green for sap green. Ooh, that's got a nice olivey tone to it. It's not one of those ultra bright sap greens that looks more like a hooker's green. It's got good granulation to it. It's nice. Reminds me a little bit of Daniel Smith on Undersea. And I don't like Undersea when it splits and forms all the colours, but when you just use it as is, it's quite pretty. It does resemble chromic oxide green in some ways. It's got that kind of ultra denseness about it, but granulation's pretty. It's flocculating nicely, and you can see that the yellow is kind of separating out a little bit, so you are getting a bit of interest. I like that. That's a nice property to have, especially for landscapes, and we'll see how I can use it. I am going to do some tutorials with these paints a bit later. So next up is yellow ochre. Excuse having to look at my arm all the time. It's probably quite bruised as I've had some botulinum injections into it in the last month to help me switch off some nerves so I don't feel the pain. They're working very well, but I am bruised like crazy. So now yellow ochre. This is one of those colours that's just so samey because you get it in every set. Oh, this is quite... It's hard to get a good amount of pigment up with this. It's quite a light yellow ochre. I'm going to have to scrub at it. So, okay, this is an interesting one. It's got a lovely granulation and a lovely texture, but you need quite a lot of it because it's not very vivid. It doesn't have a very high pigment load versus the others. It's got a lovely granulation. It's got a lovely kind of orange gold tone to it, very sandy. You could use that for a beach as is without mixing it with anything apart from shadow areas because it's already got that granulation to it. Reminds me a little bit more perhaps of a raw sienna, but it's nice. You know, I think you could make it work. It wouldn't be a bad thing. So this interesting Venetian red next, which is a mixture of what I would normally use for Venetian red, red iron oxide with some yellow ochre. These are often really pigmented, so I'm only using a little. Ooh, yeah, that's the normal kind of Venetian red hyperpigmentation. They're just so kind of clumsy colour because a little bit kind of goes so far, and it's very flat quite often. But that yellow ochre granulates, so let's see how it looks. That's actually more interesting than most of them are. It has got a kind of melted chocolate ice cream pinkish tone to it, but it's nice. I mean, it's not what I'd call a Venetian red. To me, Venetian red is much more red, much more vivid and flat. This is a nice granulating colour. It's probably going to make lovely neutrals with blue, but I'm not sure it's quite what I would call a Venetian red or an English red or Indian red or anything in that kind of family. They're usually much denser. They don't granulate in quite this way. And I'll later in the video, maybe I'll drag out some of my swatches and show you other Venetian reds. But it's it's nice. It's got the general intensity, and I think it'll work in mixes really well. Brown umber, burnt umber next. Not a huge user of this paint. Burnt umbers are paints I don't tend to go near very much. Not because they're horrible, but just because they're the sort of thing I never seem to need to use. They're often a very yellowish, flat brown, which is that's exactly what this is. Again, this one's almost got, like the yellow ochre, it doesn't have the pigment load of the others. And I don't know whether that's just because it doesn't lift as easily. I think it perhaps needs a little bit of oxgall or something to get it to lift. Maybe I'll try that later. Colour-wise, it's nice. It's a little tiny bit orange, only a tiny bit, for a burnt umber. Maybe that's just the light. No, I think that's just because it's wet and it's reflecting. It's a nice shade. It's got the right kind of almost dullness to it that burnt umbers often have. They're quite rocky, quite sort of steady, flat colours. Now we move on to the burnt sienna, which I've popped in here. Oh no, hang on. Haven't done my ivory black yet, so let's get that out of the way. Blacks I find are useful. Don't get me wrong. I love vine black. I'm addicted to using it. Especially the really blue ones. I just don't think in a set it's very useful because there are other colours that are more useful. This is quite a nice one. It's got a lot of texture to it. Not too brown. A lot of bone blacks have got a brown undertone to them. This one's quite a cool one. It lifts fairly easily. I have nothing against it as a colour. It's nice actually. As blacks go, it's not that horrible flat glossy black you often get, the cheap ones with aniline black in them. It's nice. I just think in a set, I personally, if I was putting a set together for anyone, beginner or advanced, I would not include a black. I mean, at least they haven't included a white. Personally, I think what I probably would have done if I was designing this set is I would have used a phthalo blue instead of the cobalt blue, just to give you a really cool option there and one that doesn't granulate. And I probably would have taken the black out and put a burnt sienna in its place. If I could add two more colours, I'd probably add a Van Dyke brown or a sepia or something like that on this row. And into this top row, I would probably actually have a cobalt blue, so you get a phthalo, a cobalt and an ultramarine, so you get the three different tiers of blue, as they're very useful to have, especially in landscape painting. So that's what I would have done. I mean, it's only my view. So now let's try this burnt sienna, which I did actually try out. It's actually that paint there in the background. Very briefly, because I spilt a bit, so I smeared it on the paper and wetted it, and it was a nice colour actually. It's a really nice burnt sienna. It's got a lot of life to it. It lifts well from this slightly wetted dried out tube paint. It's got an interesting red, really red undertone to it. When I put it on that paper below, which I'll show you in a second, that was straight from the tube, just there, very thick. Just painted it on really thick with the brush to clean up the mess I made when I spilt it. and that's really nice. I don't usually use it with quite such intensity when I paint. I wouldn't usually put quite so much on, but it's actually really nice, and it's making me think of a painting I can do with these as a tutorial to show how they can be used, and I think I will use that as one of the main colours, and probably will only use the earths. I probably won't use much of the actual colours. So, oops. So let's just go through these now they've had a chance to dry down a little bit, and have a look at how they look. So, first of all, we've got that Hansa yellow, lemon yellow, which is fine. You know, it's a nice flat green. It doesn't granulate. It shouldn't granulate. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's a really nice colour. The Cad Yellow Light has got a very slight granulation, but you can't really see it because it's just so vivid as a colour. It's exactly what a Cad Yellow Light should look like. I have no objection to it. I think it's really nice. The Cool Red, the Carmine Quinacridone Violet, did form a bit of a bloom there because the paper wasn't uniformly wetted, I should say, but it's still wet on the edge there. You know, it's a nice colour actually. I really like it. It's almost a cherry sort of red, very pretty, and I think it will form nice mixes. The Cad Red has got its soft granulation. It's exactly what a Cad Red should look like. Not too intense, not too dull. Doesn't look like it's got any adulterants. That's nice. Cobalt Blue, you know, it's nice. It's got granulation. It's pretty. It's not as cool as the blues that I like to have. I like to have something like a step cooler to make the bright greens with. But we'll see how they mix in a moment. French Ultramarine, again, beautiful, really nice soft granulations there. The pigment is clearly ground very finely, and that's really encouraging to see, especially as these are not expensive paints. That Phthalo Green Deep is nice. Again, it's got a nice tone to it, and it isn't too dark. You could get a lot of use from that. I love the Permanent Sap Green. It's not a kind of traditional one. It's got lovely granulation. I mean, really strong granulation, and so you get the yellow kind of underlayer playing through it. I think that would be great for landscapes because you could add so many earth tones into it. Yellow ochre was perhaps a little insipid, but it's got a nice goldness to it. It's not one of those flat synthetic yellow ochres. It's got that kind of warmth you get with the natural ones. They're very slightly different. The Venetian Red, again, perhaps a little insipid, but it's a nice tone and it's not too heavy, and I like that. Burnt Umber, what a burnt umber should be. Perhaps a little too warm, maybe, but I can't tell because I haven't really put much out and it's not dry. The black, it's a nice black. I mean, it's got nice kind of granulation and movement to it, and I do like it a lot. I don't think it's the most useful colour to have in a set, especially for beginners, so that's my only objection. I would probably swap it out with another colour and use it for something else. And the Burnt Sienna that they kindly sent me as an add-on, lovely. I mean, it's a really nice, really nice Burnt Sienna. So I'm going to film this video in chunks because my back is really starting to get difficult now, but I just wanted, before I stop this chunk and start filming the next one tomorrow, and then I'm hoping I can upload this tomorrow as well, get it all done in one day. I just wanted to do the two key mixing triads. So I'm going to do the cool and the warm. Okay, just got the focus on there. I'm just going to do two triads of basic mixing just to see how these colours mix, and then tomorrow I'll try some different mixes. I like to wet the area. If any of you have seen my other videos where I paint a triad, I generally like to wet the area just to make sure the paints don't dry out, because there's nothing more annoying than having to reapply them. So I generally obey the kind of CMY sort of concept, so I generally will put my yellow on the right, red in the middle, and blue on the left. That's just how I do it. my water's getting to the point now where it's almost sludgy, so I'm having to wipe my brush off as well. My clean water's fine. So we'll put in the cool red now, the carmine at the top, over here to mix with the blue, and over here to mix into that yellow. Yellow's a little bit overpowered there. The carmine's making a nice red rather than an orange because they are quite far apart. I'm going to put some more of that yellow into it, and there we have an orange. It's not a bright orange. I'm surprised by that I didn't get more of a bright orange, but it's actually, no, it shouldn't be too bright. Let me be correct there. I'm surprised it's sort of so brown and not more red. I would usually expect a red orange. That's just kind of my usual expectation with most paints. That's not sort of colour theory or anything, but it's nice. That's the kind of sort of thing we should be getting. I'm going to put in the cobalt blue now. First of all into the red. That's a nice kind of violet there. That will probably granulate, so that should be interesting. And I'll put some into this yellow here, and we're getting a quite vivid, nice green. It's a bluish green because I didn't balance the colours very well. It's difficult when you're working with a new paint you're not too familiar with to get the pigment loads really balanced. Now, if this was a phthalo blue, I would get the most gorgeous, bright, vivid green here. And I feel a bit limited that I've got this. I mean, it's a lovely grass green. It's very useful green, but I haven't got a bright, sunny day green. So that's a little bit of a limitation. Not hugely bad, but it's a bit of a limitation. Let's pop some water down here and do the warms. Can you see? Yes, you can. I'm sitting down because my back is failing me. So I can't see into the thing on the camera to see quite what you can see. So I'm going to put down the warm yellow, the cad yellow now, in the same way I did before. It's lovely, it's such a sunshine, spring morning, happy yellow. Cadmium yellow is such a nice, cheerful colour. And now I'll put down the warm red, the cadmium red. I'm going to do them in a slightly different order rather than a true triad because I'm running out of space. So mixing cadmium red in here. I have got quite a nice orange there, but it's quite a similar orange. It's not a bright, bright, bright orange. It's a little faint. You can never get a cadmium orange this way, but you can often get a brighter orange or a warmer orange than this. It's nice, it's not unpleasant. Again, I'm throwing these together. I'm not doing nice sort of quantitative mixing, so I'm not going to get perfect blends all the way. So in this bottom area, I'm going to just do the warm red and the warm blue and the warm blue and the warm yellow. So I'm going to put the warm red. Problem with the cadmiums in all browns is it's really easy to overpower other colours. Same with the phthalos. And I'm going to use the warm blue now. I'm trying to put lots down. And I should get a really dark, yeah, look at that. Really, really dark kind of, I'm mixing an orangey red with a blue. So if you mix orange with blue, or brown, which is just orange having a bad day, with blue, you get these kind of neutrals. So this kind of morning lavender, as I would call it, like a Victorian lady who's in half mourning might wear that kind of very, very muted purple. It's very similar because cadmium red is really a very dark orange, if you think about it. So you are going to get a near neutral. A near neutral with a reddish tint is a kind of soft purple. That is entirely to be expected. I'm just going to see what happens if I put more of the red in, whether I can get any in between sorts of shades, I suppose. And I'm going to do that by just taking more of the blue and just putting it in and see where it goes. I'm not doing that properly. Just curious. I'm just curious to see what colours I can make. So I now need to do the blue with the yellow, and a warm blue and a warm yellow usually makes a dirty, dirty green, a dirty olivey kind of green, the kind that are fantastic for landscape painting. And yep, that's exactly what we get. So I'm a little disappointed I couldn't get a bright green there, and that's because that blue is not cool enough. But if you look at the range of landscape greens you can make with this set, because of course you've got the green already made up, the permanent sap green, and you've got these. I mean, these are quite similar because I don't think that cobalt blue is cool enough. These are very similar, but you can make a lot of different things from that. Lovely, lovely violet here, gorgeous muted lilac, lavender down here, two lovely oranges. Those are really nice triads. They're nothing terribly bad about them at all. One test I do want to do before I stop on the theme of mixing is I want to see what happens when I mix a this is, by the way, this is Winsor & Newton artist watercolour paper, which I just can't stand, so I'm using it up for these videos. I just want to mix that warm blue. Look at that movement on that blue. That is going to make such wonderful skies. I'm going to mix it with burnt sienna and see what the quality of the neutral is like. See if I can get a neutral. This is one of the best ways to get, oh look at that, really dark neutral, is to mix a warm blue with a muted orange, like a burnt sienna, and that is the colour that Jane Blundell, who I will link to up there, fantastic. Well, actually I can't link to her because I can't link to other people's websites in their iCards. I'll link to her down there in the comment, in the description. Fantastic Australian watercolourist, and she nicknames that mixture Jane's Grey to kind of go with Payne's Grey. I love it. I just think it's really funny, so that's what I call it. Just to prove a point, let's just see what happens if you mix that cobalt blue with the same colour. Can you get a neutral this way? Oh, you know, you're not far off. Let's put some more blue into that. Yeah, you can. So that kind of also shows that cobalt blue is probably a bit too warm to be of use. So that's my wariness, is I would say this set needs a cooler blue. But I love these paints. The tube one and the pan ones are great. They lift so easily, they paint really well. Great pigment loads, great movement, great flow. And tomorrow when I continue this video, so this will all be one video, you'll just have a little gap now between the segments when I edit it together. I'll look at flow, so I'll look at how they look when I wet and put them down and watch them do a race and see how fast they move. And we'll look at some mixes with those earths, and we will look at how they compare with other pigments or paints of the same colour from other brands. I think on the whole though, so far, I'm seriously impressed. These are really economical paints. They sell for like £4 for a full pan. To get that set of 12 full pans and the palette, which is a really high quality palette. I mean, I buy these really cheap, really shiny, awful ones from Mihan on Amazon that I've got a horrible sort of mixing surface that's really not very good. They're really cheap. This reminds me of the Schminker palettes the quality of them. You know, the hinges are good, it doesn't rattle. Mixing surfaces are great because that is not a pure white. There's a very slight cream undertone, which makes mixing a lot easier. This mixing surface actually sits at an angle, so your paint that you've mixed doesn't run back into the palette, which is great. You haven't got any sharp edges, which the Schminker palettes have got loads of sharp edges. And the metal carriage that the pans are on comes out. You've got mixing areas underneath. And this is enamelled in cream as well, so you can really see the colours properly. So rather than the metal surface you often get. So the palette, which has got a thumb loop as well. I can't flip it over because it's got wet paint, but it's got a thumb loop. The palette and the 12 half pans retail for about £40, which actually, if you are trying to get going, is pretty good. Now, if you got those as half pans, if you were a beginner and you got those as half pans, so you had a little one, maybe 25 quid, that's kind of the amount you expect to pay. By getting these as full pans, you're saving yourself some money, because full pans are always more economical. I'm just cleaning off the yellow. I don't know why it is. I dirty lemon yellows always. I always get Hansa yellow lemon yellows filthy, and I have to clean them. It's not so bad with other colours, but I think it's just because that looks so light that it really shows up. There we are. Got most of it off. Oops. I'm going to get in a metal, get it everywhere. So I think they're great value. The quality is really good. If I was blind testing here, I would probably say most of those were Winsor & Newton / Schminker in quality. I know they're not Schminker because they're not poured, but they feel like it when you wet them. They lift really easily. So I'm impressed. Tomorrow, flow, mixing and other uses. But so far so good. Jackson's, these are for an own brand paint. These are truly outstanding in quality. Hi again, I'm back. It's now the next day. I just want to clarify something. I actually contacted Jackson's this morning to say about this cobalt blue issue. Like, was that intentional? Or maybe... I did think last night when I was going to bed, I thought maybe they sent me, because they didn't send me it like in the proper packaging that you would get it in. They sent it to me in a bag. I wondered if they picked the wrong pan up and maybe it should have been phthalo blue. And the lady I spoke to, Julie, which I think is their marketing person, who was the one who agreed to send me all this in the first place, said, oh, that actually does seem a little bit weird. I'll check. In the meantime, I've been on their website and I've found this set, which I'll talk about in a second, and it clearly does have cobalt blue in the photo and in the list of paints, so I do believe it is intentional. So if you do buy this, and I'll tell you a couple of really cool things about it in a moment, buy a phthalo blue green shade from Jackson's own line, which is a couple of pounds, and maybe take the black out and put a burnt sienna in there, or add a burnt sienna as an additional colour. Personally, I would probably add maybe a raw sienna or a raw umber as well, or perhaps even one of the purples. Having a nice purple would probably really balance this out. So put a phthalo blue green shade in, and I would put it here, and then have the cobalt blue as the mid-tone and the French ultramarine on the end. Take the black out and put a burnt sienna in, and then add a dioxazine purple on the end. That would really balance this set, and that's going to cost you, like, I don't know, £5 or something. This set at the moment, Jackson's sell it for just over £50 normally, and it's on sale at the moment. I think it's £45. And when you go over to my website, there's a link through, and yeah, it's an affiliate link. I do make a tiny profit if you buy any of these paints. I'm very open about that. But what I learned, which is really cool, is that if you buy one of these sets, the charity Trees for Life will plant a tree, which is a really good thing. So every time you buy one of these, Jackson's donates some of the money to Trees for Life to plant a tree. And I think that's a really nice thing. There's not many shops that actually bother to give something back. There's something about that that's really kind of encouraged me a little bit, that actually they're maybe a shop I need to think a little bit more about, because they do things a little bit differently. So what I want to show you now is some more of the properties of these paints, and I want to show you painting from the tube directly. The paper that I'm going to use is Langton Rough. It's not Langton Prestige, it's standard Langton Rough. very cheap. I bought it very cheaply. It's the end of a pad. I thought I may as well use it up, and this is a good way to use it up. So let's just get rid of this crap I left out from last night. Some of you will recognise that the video image that I was showing on Instagram was one I took. I staged it this morning by laying all this out in a certain way, and I just left it that way. So the way it's just looked while I was talking is that image, really. So Mrs. Langton, sorry it's a bit grotty. I don't really care how pristine it is. Just a little update on that burnt sienna. It's now nearly completely dry, so it's taken 48 hours to dry down, and I painted with it just now, and it's working perfectly. You know, it's really nice paint to use when it's dried down. It re-wets just the same way as all the pans do, so you'll have to trust me on that. Because I just tested it, I can't now demonstrate it because it's already wet, but it does re-wet as easily as the pans. I wanted to talk about flow, and this is something I like to look at with new paints. So I'll put out quite a large area of water, and I'm going to pick on one colour. I'm going to pick on the carmine, which is made with PV19 quinacridone violet, and I'm just going to put that along that edge. Okay, and we'll just leave that, and we'll see how well it moves. Let's zoom in. You can see it's got flow, it's moving. It is a motile paint. It's not like Holbein or White Knights that just kind of stay still. I just want to compare it with some other popular brands just so you can get an idea. I'm going to show you with Permanent Carmine by Schminke, just to prove this is a Schminke set. This is Permanent Carmine, which is, you know, it looks very similar, it lifts very similarly. And look how similar the colour is. I mean, that is almost, with the naked eye, impossible to tell the difference between those paints. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that Schminke had made these paints, but I can tell they're not poured pans, they're extruded, so they're clearly not Schminke, but they're very similar indeed. I'm going to do the same with a PV19 in my day-to-day set, which is Daniel Smith's quinacridone rose, same pigment. And I'll label these in a moment so that when we talk about them you can see which one's which. So this is from my everyday set. It's Daniel Smith tube paint that I've dried down. Okay, that's got a little bit more flux than perhaps the others have got. It's also a much more cherry-like pinky colour, whereas the two carmines are very similar. I mean, they should be. They are carmines, not roses or whatever that was. I've got a core, which has got a similar colour. I don't think it's got exactly the same pigment, but I've got a core set here. There's a quinacridone magenta, which is not the same pigment, but it's very similar. I mean, it's a quinacridone, so I think showing it, even though it's not identical, this is core tube paint dried down, I think it's a good comparison. So this will sort of whoosh, as you can see, because core paints do that, and I think it's because they just put way too much of the dispersant in them, or perhaps they're using the same kind of concentration people would use in a standard binder, but in Aquazole there's less resistance, so it's whooshing along. I don't know. I mean, I don't know the exact formulation of their paints, but I find that very quick, very fast movement a little bit too much for me. I think it can be annoying, very difficult to paint with sometimes because of that tendency to move. You know, how could you do like wet into wet and just cover a very small area? You know, if you just wanted wet up here and then have a very slow fade, you can't, because it moves, whereas with all these other paints you can have that. You know, like this could be the edge of a rose petal, and this area could be white because it's got light on it. Couldn't do that with core. It's just a restriction of them as a product. You can't do that. So something I like about this is that we have that ability. So this is Jackson, Schminker, Daniel Smith, and Core, and these are PB19, and this one's PR122. That doesn't make a difference. The fact that it's different pigment, really, it's a quinacridone. They are very structurally similar, so I'm not going to be too worried about that. That movement is really nice. I like the fact that we've got some movement, but it's not too much movement. It's a kind of a gentle movement, and that is good. That is something I really like, personally, is to have control with my paint. I don't like paint that just kind of does that. I like to be able to do something. So I've got some Oxgall here. It's Daler and Rowney Oxgall solution, kind of one you buy in places like Hobbycraft and other similar shops. And I've just got a pipette here, and I'm just adding, you know, the tiniest amount. I'm just going to add a tiny speck of that. It breaks the surface tension and pushes away the paint particles. So I just wanted to see how the paint behaved with the addition of a little Oxgall. And on the next page, so you can see how they're affected by it. And I want to, on the next page, I will mix some Oxgall into the paint before painting it to see how that looks. So Oxgall does move it, so you can get a bit of extra movement with Oxgall, as you should. That's what Oxgall's for. It's for adding extra movement. Now I could, if I really wanted to, go through these paints and add extra gum arabic to them and see if we can get nice glossy effects. I could add iridescent medium and granulating medium. I'm not going to, but I am going to show you them with Oxgall added. I'll just let the excess paint run onto the table there. That doesn't bother me. I want to show that first of all. I want to show it with and without Oxgall. So we'll do it with a more dense pigment. So we'll do it with Cad Red, and we'll do the control, and then we'll do it with Oxgall, and we'll see how these fare. Because what should happen, for those of you who've never used Oxgall, and I'm going to have to mix up a wash to do this, Oxgall will sort of give me a smoother, much more, not controlled, that's the wrong word, a much smoother, much flatter, much less clumpy effect. So when I have a very granulating, granular pigment, it will allow me to make sure it doesn't, I'll still get granulation, but I won't get clumping. I don't know if that fully makes sense, but I hope it does. So I've just mixed in to some Cad Red, which is gorgeous, on here on the palette. So this is Cad Red with equal amounts of water, and I'm going to put a drop of Oxgall into one of them, and then I'm going to paint them out. So I'm going to get most of the Cad Red off the brush because I hate to waste pigment. And I'm just washing the brush out. And then I'm going to wipe it off. So I'm going to take my Oxgall. There's lots of ways you can use Oxgall, and this is only, sorry, I've got the brush in my mouth. This is only one of them. I'm going to add a small amount. I'm probably adding about 1/10 of a milliliter, just a little, to this side, okay? So that's that added. And I will mix that in a moment with a tool, not to the brush, so that you can see clearly that I haven't contaminated the brush or anything with it. So I will use my silicone tool. I think a drop did just go over into the other side. You'll see it also kind of wets the surface better because Oxgall is just a detergent. It's a bile detergent that we all, you know, it's the same kind of stuff humans produce in our bile. It's purified out of abattoir waste gallbladders, not very pleasant. You can buy synthetic substitutes, but they're quite pricey. But if you buy flow enhancer intended for acrylic paint and use it very sparingly, you can get the same kind of effect. So I kind of want this wet into wet, so I'm just going to put some water down even though I know I will paint beyond this. So let's take up the control first, put that wet into wet, and then I'm going to paint down a sort of flat area. I'm not doing a proper wash here. I'm not doing a nice kind of, you know, you go in rows and you do it neatly, because I can't be bothered, really. I'm washing my brush out, and then we'll come back to, and you can see the paint has really wet the surface here. Take up that ox gold version, and I'm going to do the same, drop it along the top there, and then do a square here. And the ox gold, being a detergent, effectively breaks the surface tension. It means that the particles sink rather than float. They don't clump together. They will have a better time of it, really. And it should mean that we get a quite different effect when this dries, but we won't see it until it dries. Some pigments don't benefit from ox gold. Some will look exactly the same. I want to see if this one looks different. It's most useful with things like cadmiums and things with a bit of density to them. I don't seem to have my gum arabic to hand, but I'm just going to go and grab that, so bear with me. It's not far away. These things are never where I think they are. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm into the left hand of those two blobs we had on the palette. I'm refreshing that one, and I'm setting up another one. So I'm setting up one in an adjacent well that doesn't have any ox gall. So fair test is what I really want here. So just to show you, that one has ox gall, these two do not. I'm going to put gum arabic in this one, not this one. This is Winsor & Newton gum arabic. And just to sort of prove to you that I'm actually adding it, I will zoom out and I will add it with a palette knife, because again I don't want to contaminate other things. So this is quite sticky, gooey gum arabic. Okay, there it is. I'm going to just let that drop. You can see that that's just dropped on. I've put a bit of extra there in case I need it. And what this will do in a wash is it will retard the movement of the paint particles so that I can get a flatter, smoother wash. That's the idea. So let me just do the control again. And this time I'm going to put a bit more water. And I'm going to do a, as we should do, a neat wash. It's not going to be perfect because I'm standing up and I'm quite a distance away because I have to do this in a way that I can film it. So it's never quite as easy. This is a Proline Plus brush by Pro Art, in case anyone's interested. So that's just a standard flat wash. Washed out the brush, and let's label these. The next one is going to be gum arabic. Gum arabic is a wonderful product, so useful for all sorts of things. You can make a mask out of it, all sorts of stuff, and I just really like it for getting different effects with paints, and some paints are improved by it, some are not. So I've used it quite generously here. Let's now zoom in and let's see how this one looks when it's dry. I mean, we won't see the effect until these dry down, really, but I can feel it's quite different. It's quite smooth, much glossier. I feel that the brush is sort of lubricated in its passage across the paper. Okay, so that's how that went. And I'm just mixing in all the rest of that gum arabic because, you know, I put a little extra blob. I've just mixed it in completely, and I'm just going to kind of put some up there. Excessive gum arabic, and we'll just see how that looks later. So I want to let these dry for a moment. I don't need to let them fully, completely solidify, but I've had the problem with using gum arabic is it's very sticky, so getting your brush clean of pigment afterwards is not quite the easiest of tasks. Okay, so I've talked to a few people today about these paints, and I've said that I'm really amazed by the quality. I can't believe an own brand is this quality. And Mrs. Vyrick, the frugal crafter, who I'll link to up there, my partner in crime often in YouTube, we often spar off each other and talk to each other. And I've missed kind of interacting with her in making videos and mentioning each other, really. We've interacted kind of off stage while I've been away from YouTube for the last few months. But she did say, you know, there are a lot of companies that will make private label paints for shops and so on. And some of them she's found in the USA are surprisingly good quality. And I said, this is almost even further. I mean, these are like schminker quality. These are like absolute top of the line quality. And I'm a bit taken aback by them. So I know she, along with others, is looking forward to seeing the outcomes. I hate spiral bound notepads because I can never get the pages out. And I have, of course, got paint everywhere. Yeah, I've ruined those two. They'll dry fine, but I knew that would happen. Sorry about that. I'm sure it will be absolutely fine. We'll just blot this. Now, what I wanted to look at was some other mixes. That was the one thing I really wanted to do today. So I talked about neutrals yesterday, and the sort of the Jane's Grey neutral, if you like, the burnt sienna with the ultramarine blue, which to me is a complete essential. I can't work without that. But I wanted to see, if you didn't have burnt sienna, if you didn't buy it as an extra, will this Venetian red give an adequate neutral? So let's try that first. There's a couple of things I want to do with this Venetian red, and I actually want to do a mixing triad with it as well. So just put some down. And I'll pick up some of the beautiful French ultramarine. I haven't sort of sprayed these paints with water or anything, so first lift is always a little bit trickier. And let's mix the two together, and yeah, look at that. It's a really nice, flat, cool neutral there. So just here, we've got a lovely neutral really easily. So if you don't buy the burnt sienna, you can get a good neutral with the French ultramarine and the Venetian red. And I'm pleased with that because the ultramarine is great, but the Venetian red, of course, has got some yellow added to it. So I wasn't sure if we were going to get a brown, but no, we do get a proper neutral. And I'm pleased with that. That is a good sign. So if you don't want to buy burnt sienna as an extra, you can make those kinds of neutrals without it. I personally would still want the burnt sienna, but you know, hey, that's me. So let's just compare these neutrals a second. So we've got Venetian red, which is PR101 with some PY43, and I've got some burnt umber, which is PBR7, brown iron oxide. Yeah, they're all variations on a theme. The brown iron oxides tend to have some manganese oxide, varying proportions thereof, added to them. And the more they have, the more kind of very dark flat brown they go, and they lose the reddishness. And this is the burnt sienna, which I just love. I think it's fantastic. They are different. But what I wanted to point out was that the burnt sienna and the burnt umber, are the same pigment. They're both PBR7. So there's quite a bit of variance in that pigment. You know, different. This one's probably got more manganese than this one. You've got granulation here and here that you don't have here. So this is a very flat one. This has granulation. That's one of the reasons I like the burnt sienna more than this, is that this gives me slight options that I don't feel I get with that colour. So, you know, you can do stuff with it. There's a lot of choice there. I wanted to do a couple of colour wheels. I wanted to do an earth colour wheel. I don't have an earth blue, something like an indigo or a vine black here, but I'm going to try doing a mixing triad using the yellow ochre and the burnt sienna, and or even the yellow ochre and the Venetian red actually, with the ultramarine, and we'll see what we get. So we'll obey the kind of ordering we did before, where we did blue, red, yellow around the sort of circle. I mean, I didn't do the triads we did yesterday, or earlier in this video, as a circle, but hey ho. So we've got this, I love this yellow ochre. It reminds me a lot of some of the Daniel Smith mineral based, highly granulating, not the Primatex, just the general various different yellow iron oxides that they have. It reminds me a lot of those, with that soft granulation that's really nice. It's very different from the Winsor & Newton yellow ochre, which is totally flat. This has got a nice bit of extra to it. So I'm just going to put some blue there, and I'm going to put some blue over here, and then I'm going to run away because I don't want to get too much blue into that yellow ochre, because I'm worried it won't, it will overpower it. So let's see what we get. We should get some kind of sludgy green. It's very grey. It's probably because this is quite a gold warm ochre, but that is a green. It's a very grey green, but it is a green. So we can get a really dark earthy green that way. And if we take the Venetian red and mix that in, remembering that this Venetian red's got some yellow ochre in it already, I'm wondering if we can get an interesting, like a gold ochre or a medium brown or something like that. You know, it just overpowers it too much, but I have managed to mix some in here, and it makes it a bit creamier. It's hard to see, I think, on camera because it's quite subtle, but it makes it creamier and more yellow. So yes, you can get a range of earths. And I'm going to do a tutorial with these paints a little later on, maybe in a week or two. And that will be based using mostly the earth tones, I think, because I really feel I want to show them off. I love this burnt sienna so much. Let's see what happens with the burnt sienna if we use that as the red. What do we get? Let's put some into the yellow. And put some blue into it. I mean, obviously the blue will give us a grey, but yeah, just goes to Jane's grey there. We can make a lot of colours with these earths, lots of shades, and I haven't even brought the umber into the equation yet. So much choice here. I do also want to look at these greens, because the problem with greens, as many of you know already, the beginners out there might not know this, greens you buy from a packet, like these ones, you don't use them as they are. You have to add some yellow ochre or other colours to tone them down and make them realistic. Now remember that this green, the green on the right that I'm putting down, the one that almost looks like chromic oxide green, is an unusual permanent sap green that's a mixture of ultramarine and yellow ochre. So it's a convenience colour. You could mix it yourself. You don't actually need it. But it's useful to have convenience mixed greens. So what I want to do first of all is just show you what I would normally do, which is to take some yellow ochre and mix in a fair amount of it, and that will kind of olive these greens down a bit, and you can see a nice, so turn that very bright phthalo green deep into quite soft olive. So that gives you a more realistic colour for painting landscapes or botanicals. That's one way of dealing with it. With this green, I want to see what happens if I add more of the yellow ochre, which is one of its constituents. What kinds of shades can I get if I do that? Lots of very granulating greens. I don't really know what the phrase I want to use is. They're not quite olives, they're almost vegetable kind of greens. I don't really know how to express it, but it certainly mixes really well in that direction. It gives, again, some nice olives, some nice distant hill colours, and that's nice to have. And I want to do it in the other direction with some French ultramarine and see if I blew it. There we go, getting a nice kind of petrol blue there. It's not mixed in fully, obviously, but again, it's a useful colour for distant hills, distant foliage. Nice to have it as an option. I'm quite happy with that. I showed you yesterday I did colour wheels where I did the warms and then I did the cools. Let's cross them over. What happens if we take the warm blue there and add the cool yellow? Should get a very sludgy green, and we do, but isn't that a useful green? That's a kind of spinach green, that's a foliage green. So again, lots and lots of options for nature, wildlife, landscapes. You've got good colours for mixing sea tones as well. Let's do another one of those kind of wrong combinations. Let's do some carmine, like cool red. And I'm just playing at this point, I'm just throwing colours together, I don't have a sort of method at this point, and add the warm blue to it. So the warm blue with the cool purple, with the cool red, gives us this fantastic deep midnight purple. Now what that reminds me of is from the Dilutions range by Diane Reevely. One of her inks is called After Midnight, and it's exactly that purpley blue shade. It's really gorgeous. So highly recommend her products, but it's exactly that colour. So you can get a lot from these, and I do want to just kind of consider marine for those of you who are seascape painters, which is something I do quite a bit of because I do live right by the sea, a little bit further away than I did a year ago. I'm going to pop some paint down, and what I like to do when I paint the sea, you know, I'm not doing a sky and everything else, I just want to show you what I do. I like to take ultramarine blue and paint it wet into wet, and I do it in stripes. Okay, and obviously I would do it over a much larger area and the kind of graduation of them would be more subtle. And then I take a cooler blue, in this case cobalt blue, but in the ideal world phthalo blue, or ultramarine purple. Ultramarine violet works really well for this second step if you want a sunset. See? And I paint it in between, and you just leave them to bleed, and it gives the impression of the ripples on the surface because you get different lighting. And I really like doing that. It's worked pretty well with these two colours, but again, I think they're too close to each other. I really feel the urge for a phthalo blue because I can't mix a vivid green with this set, and that really kind of aggrieves me. Let's do another mix. Let's do the cool yellow, the lemon. Wonderful Hansa yellow 10G that it's made from. Gorgeous, gorgeous colour. And I'm going to use the warm red. I'm going to put the cadmium red into it. This should give us an earthy orange. Look at that. Gorgeous earthy orange there. Fantastic for cliffs and rocks. And we'll do the opposite. We'll do the warm cadmium yellow with its beautiful like liquid sunshine. And we'll put into that the carmine, the cool red. Now this is a little bit of a warmer, redder colour, but can you see it's muted? Can you see it's got a sort of, it's almost burnt sienna in colour. It's that sort of, it's what I would call a burnt orange. I don't think that's necessarily what most people would call it, but it's what I would call a burnt orange. And that's what matters because I'm the one saying it. Useful, wonderful colours for rocks. And if you do these in quite thick coats, you can scratch into most brands and make rock shapes and stuff. But you do need them quite thick if you're going to attempt that. So I've really shown you the versatility of all the mixes you can really do. One we haven't done, of course, is lemon yellow with the cobalt blue, which will just give us another variation of muddy greens, but they're not mud because they're what we want. They're intentionally that sort of range. very nice there. Now don't get me wrong, I like cobalt blue, but I don't like it in this set because I think it's been incorrectly picked. I think it should be phthalo blue. I think it's not quite what they would have wanted. So let's go back to the effects that we did just a moment ago. So those flows that we did have all run off the page now. The okay, little experiment we did. So the cadmium red control versus with oxgall, you get a much flatter wash with the oxgall. It spreads the colour out. These two areas you can't really tell the difference between on camera, but this one has slightly stronger granulation and this one is much softer. The ones where we added gum arabic, what you probably can't see is that this one, or maybe you can, this one with the gum arabic is still wet, whereas the control is almost dry. That's one thing with adding gum arabic, it takes much longer to dry, but can you see this is almost more vivid, it's brighter and it's flatter. This one has got little areas of lightness, this one is neat and flat, so that's one of the nice things with adding gum arabic. These paints don't need it, but it is a nice thing to add. And finally, because I'm aware that this video is about a year long now, I am going to show you the fantastic burnt sienna straight from the tube rather than from a pan that I dried down. It's a generous tube. It's 21 millilitres. I think they're about £5. They really are a lot of paint, and they're a high quality tube. It's not going to tear. These are well made. I'm going to take it direct and put it wet into wet, and look at that lovely flow of a wet into wet effect there. It's great. It's not sticky, but you can tell it's got honey in it as an ingredient. This is neat. This has got no water added, and it moves. So many watercolours are really stiff when you paint them from the tube and you have to add water. You could actually paint this as is and get lovely effects with it because you can put it on really thick, and I like that. I think there's a lot of possibility with these paints, and again, you can scratch into it while it's still wet and make bricks and wood effects and all of that sort of thing because you can put it on very thick, and you can mix into it other colours. I've got some cad red here. You can mix them together while they're wet straight on the paper, and you can let it dry with that texture. You can leave it thick. Impasto is the wrong word, but it does hold its shape. It doesn't just kind of flatten out over time. It will dry like that from my own little playings with it. And I'm just wondering if I take a bit of cad red, can I glaze over it? Yeah, it's dense enough that I can glaze over it without lifting it up, because it's very sticky and heavy and it stays where it is on the paper. Look at that, and it's not really lifted much up at all, but I could glaze over the whole thing with cad red. Shows how transparent that cad red is as well. So, in summation, these are really, really, really good value paints. You've got lovely colours, they work really well, you can do a lot with them, you can glaze, you can lift, you can use them straight from the tube, do anything you want with them. The flow is really controllable. It's comparable to Daniel Smith or Schminker, I feel, rather than Core. You've got all these fantastic mixes you can do with them, and I showed you a variety of those in the earlier part of the video. I won't show you those again. And you get a lot of paint for your money. I mean, I've used a fair bit of these because I've been playing with them like off camera as well today, just kind of having a look. And it looks like I've hardly touched them. I mean, they're extruded paints. There is a lot of pigment there. The colour variety is great. The pigment quality is great. Let's just remind you, you've got single pigment, single pigment, single pigment, single pigment, single pigment, single pigment. Two pigments, single pigment, two pigments, single pigment, single pigment. And then the burnt sienna that they gave me as a generous gift, single pigment. So you've only got 3 paints that have got 2 pigments in them, and they're convenience mixes really. So I don't worry about that. I think that's fine. Light fastness, fantastic. The sort of general permanence of these paints, they don't flake off. They're really well made. You've got a transparent and a transparent cool and you've got a granulating and granulating and granulating warm. This mid-tone blue is the maggot in the plum, really. You need to buy a phthalo blue green shade to swap in there, and I would take the black out unless you use black a lot, and add a burnt sienna down here and a dioxazine purple. And when you go over to my website through the link at the bottom, I will spell that out and give you the links to them, so that if you want to buy this set and augment it per my recommendations, you can. But I have to say, these are great paints for the price. Gorgeous packaging, and you get a tree planted for you for buying them. So what's not to love? I mean, you're paying the equivalent price that same kind of price range Schminker charge for, okay, yeah, 12 colours, but in half pans, same kinds of pigments, same kinds of colours. I mean, okay, they've got a Prussian blue instead of a phthalo blue, but all the others are the same as the top row. The others are very similar. So you're paying for Schminker kind of quality, Schminker kind of colours, twice as much paint for the price, and you get a palette, and you get a tree planted for you. I mean, what's not to love? The reason I'm so excited by these paints is I was really not expecting quality. I was expecting something that was a bit Cotman-y, or maybe a bit sort of Mission Gold-y, you know, reasonably good but not amazing. I wasn't expecting this level of quality. So Jackson's, I really take my hat off to you. These are really impressive paints. They paint beautifully. There is so much pigment. They lift so well. They do so many things. They mix amazingly. You get great colours. If you're looking for a new set, or you want to buy a gift for someone, especially this Christmas, if he's a beginner that you want to buy a gift for, seriously, this is perfect. You're paying a kind of similar price to get this set than you are to get, like the Cotman set that's got 48 colours in or whatever, is about half this price, but you've got all those colours no one will ever use. These are the classic colours. These are the colours that are absolutely perfect, the right pigments. Everything here is right for kind of a beginner or someone stepping up from student grade paints. All you need to do is add a burnt sienna if you think that the Venetian red isn't quite what you want, and I would say add a cool blue. Now Jackson's, if they listen to me in the meantime, may change that and make it into a cool blue. Who knows? If they do, that would be a really fantastic thing. If they don't, you can buy one for, you know, a few pounds and just add it, because there is space in here to add 2 full pans should you wish. Jackson's, especially Julie, thank you very much for your generosity. I will be doing many more videos showing these off, and don't forget, I've got more videos coming up with these fantastic brushes that they've sent me to try out as well, and I will be doing a tutorial with these paints specifically in the near future. I have not been paid anything by Jackson's to say any of this. They gave them to me, said say what you like, you know, be honest, say exactly what you want. I haven't just said positives because of that cobalt blue, but on the whole, I really, really like them. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much. This has been a long video, I know, but I really wanted to show off the quality of these paints. Thank you all very much.